Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack, post-game edition. Oregon beats UCLA 34-13 from the Rose Bowl down here in Pasadena. Guys, tale of two halves. I got a game similar to, I thought, Idaho week 1, where like they dominated in basically every statistical category, and yet you're feeling kind of like they didn't play very good at times. But at least offensively, the defense was tremendous. 6 total points. UCLA's offense couldn't do anything. It was a game where they just simply wanted to get out of here quickly. Like, post game went by quick. I think Dan Lanning was like, he found some positives, but like he quickly was like, we gotta get home. Players were like, we gotta get home. The SIDs are like saying we gotta get home. It was a game in which positives, but at the same time, plenty of things to work on. And don't ask Dan Lanning what those things are, because he won't tell you, because he doesn't want the other team to know.
No.
We're not in the remember when we were in the Circle of Trust? Do you remember that a couple of years ago? That was that was a lot of fun. We are not in the Circle of Trust anymore. Yeah, I think I'll echo a lot of what you said, Matt. I thought the first 29 minutes of this game was really solid for Oregon. Right? Like, it was kind of what you wanted to see. Offense played really clean for that part of the game, but the defense, like, they're out. Like, as you said, I think this is pretty clearly their best performance of the season. I think it'd be hard to argue.
Dan Lanning said that.
And the stats 100% back that up. It's just that after a really strange conclusion to the first half that everybody knows what I'm talking about, the BA pick 6, which you're 4 yards from it being a 35-3 or a 31-3 halftime lead, and then suddenly it gets flipped on its head, and that just seemed to like really shift momentum in a weird way. But the offense made a lot of mistakes in the second half. Special teams, you missed an extra point, you kicked the ball out of bounds. Like, there was just, we talked coming into this, like, the goal was play clean. I thought they totally accomplished that for like 29 minutes, and then the second half was more of kind of what, as you said, Matt, maybe like the Idaho Boise State, where they're just one step forward, a couple step backs, a couple nice plays, a couple mistakes. And I ultimately, like, I thought this was a pretty solid performance. You win by 3 scores on the road in a conference game. Like, I don't think you should be super disappointed, but we also talked about wanting to see Oregon play clean, and, you know, listening to post game, Dan obviously didn't feel that way. And I thought Dylan was pretty honest and upfront about the fact that he wasn't thrilled with how he played. And I think you probably would say this was, at time, I still think the Idaho game was a little bit worse, but he made the worst decision of the season to this point, throwing the ball up there to Addison. And so this is probably maybe his second worst outing, but still a really, really good game where he throws for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns, and the offense plays really well at times.
Yeah, if this is his second worst game, then great.
It's pretty good game.
31 of 41 for 280 yards, 3 touchdowns. Obviously the pick 6. My question to you guys is, if that pick 6 doesn't happen, is this like how we're talking about the game?
It would be 37-6 right now. If that was the case, let's just assume that he didn't throw a touchdown. No, I would be more positive.
Yeah, I just feel like, go ahead, Erik. I want to hear your response too.
Well, like, in general, I'm not that bummed out by the performance. I thought the defense played awesome, and the offense made a couple of mistakes in inopportune times, and it wasn't perfect. But expecting him to be perfect every week is a lot. Like, it's hard to go 8 for 8 scoring. Like, they started the game really, really well, had a mistake, kind of got off balance, I felt like. But in general, I'm not bummed out by this. This is about what I expected.
Yeah, I thought that Oregon played really well. I think they had their one blemish on their entire game, and that kind of just, I don't know, it felt like it I don't know, for like the like social media and like the Duck Twitter and our message board, like everybody was like, this was panic mode almost. And it's like, they're still up by 18 at half. UCLA can't move the ball at all. And this is coming from me, usually the guy who's more pessimistic about things, but you know, they dominated this game every single, like there was like 2 different teams out there on the field who are playing completely different sports, it felt like, at points. Like, Oregon just could not be stopped in the first half, and the only time it did come was because of that interception. And it sucked that was a pick 6, because if, you know, Brian Addison goes down 30 yards later, UCLA is probably not going to score. I mean, they didn't score an offensive touchdown all night long. They had one sustained drive, and it was the very first drive of the game for the Bruins. So I don't know. I kind of look at it this like kind of to Matt's point where they just kind of wanted to leave. Felt like, the final drive of the game, they just ran the ball. I think they had one or two passes on it. It was just like, we're going to run clock out. That's exactly what we're going to do. And UCLA was like, you know what? Great by us, because
Works for us.
They had 2 timeouts and they did not use a single one of them because they knew that it wasn't really going to make a difference. So it's not like 56-13 here. It's not 48-13. But this was still a really dominant win. I mean, they outgained UCLA by almost 300 yards. At one point, it was like double and almost triple at one point. So I thought it was a really good win overall. It just seems like the Brian Addison pick 6 just kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think we should be looking at this as in a more positive light, because this is back-to-back weeks where the offense looks really good and the offensive line can pass block and has some really good moments in run block too. Although it could be better there. I think that's one of the things I'll come away with this game, but I think we should be positive about this, man. Like it was real downhill nature after Boise State, and this back-to-back games against some decent competition where, Oregon performed and executed well for maybe not the entire game, but for a really long duration of it.
This is going to go a weird tangent here, but I have a very sadistic cat, and it feels very much like a cat that catches a mouse and basically wounds it and then plays with it for, 10 minutes before it puts it out of its misery. And that's very much what this game feels like, where Oregon got up really big, and they clearly knew that UCLA could not move the football at all offensively. And they just kind of, maybe in that third quarter, just kind of dinked around a little bit and didn't play 100% clean football. And early fourth quarter, I think maybe in the first play of the fourth quarter, whatever it was, Gabriel hit Tez Johnson for a touchdown, put any doubt of that game's who could win away and seal the win. And then it was just get out of here. But it was, to Jared's point, I agree. That interception doesn't happen. The entire tenor of this game is different. And I think we're talking about a team that we're like, hey, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. Maybe they didn't score as many points as we had hoped or expected them to. Or at least I did. You guys were more in line with what they were going to do tonight from a scoreboard perspective. But you looked at it and said, this was a clean game all the way through. And, the play, like Tez Johnson clearly slipped. And I still don't, I think it was going to get picked regardless if Tez Johnson slipped or not.
Probably, yeah.
Addison read it pretty perfectly, and Gabriel forced it. But the bigger thing is you just walk away with them like the defense is playing really good. 91 yards in the second half against Oregon State, 54 yards in the first half to UCLA, who had 66 on their first drive. So that tells you where this defense was at. And then in the second half, Dan Lanning came out and said, hey, they popped off some big runs, but they made it clear they were trying to establish the run. And we made it very clear that we weren't going to give up the huge freebie big game. So we were willing to let them run for some stuff underneath if that meant they didn't, get a huge gain on us. So I look at this and it's like Jordan Birch was terrific. The pressure up front was terrific. Derek Harmon was really good. Lanning said this was Jeffrey Boss's best game. He noted that this was the first week in a while he'd been able to have a full week of practice. That I think that's notable. Jabbar Muhammad, I think, was targeted twice all game. He basically completely shut down his side of the football field. Penalty wise, defensively, they didn't make a ton of mistakes. And I think it's just crazy because not crazy, but maybe one of the biggest things that I took away from this game is not Oregon related, how bad UCLA is. I mean, in the press box at halftime, there were multiple media members that cover UCLA that were whispering, talking quietly, Deshaun Foster might get fired after year one. Things are bad at UCLA.
I want to, just for a second, try to put into words maybe what the Oregon fans are feeling and why there's frustration. And I think it's just because the third quarter felt like a bad response to a play. And I think this was a really well played game overall. But you're disappointed because you'd seen in the first half up until that pick six, like Oregon play a really, really clean game. And it looked a lot like Corvallis. And then in the third quarter, I think the sense was, okay, we'll come back out and we'll put the foot right back down. And instead of that, you saw UCLA outgain Oregon like 100 and something to 30 yards and whatnot. And while that is frustrating and you wanted to see the foot fully down and it just be a no contest and it's over, the thing that I think you can find that's encouraging from that is regardless of UCLA outplaying Oregon, I think in the third quarter pretty clearly, they only scored 3 points and Oregon scored 0 points. It was a 3-point margin, even though it felt maybe because of some of the swings there of, gosh, UCLA had -7 rush yards in the first half. Now they had a couple chunks. Oregon couldn't be stopped, and then they had to punt on their first 2 drives in the third quarter. So I think that was probably the frustration is from my perspective, and I think I understand that frustration a little bit when you're like, hey, here it is. Here's Oregon in all its glory, an awesome 29 minutes following a really great 60 minutes on Corvallis, and then it was kind of like womp womp. But I would also respond and say, like, I actually don't think that should detract too much from your perspective of this team. I think while you can be disappointed maybe a little bit with just the way the third quarter went, because that was a tough quarter for the way this team, in terms of what it can do and what it should do against UCLA, I just think for 3 out of 4 quarters, this was a complete ass kicking. And I think that to me is more indicative of this team, aside from that third quarter. And maybe this will be a trend all year of, once they get punched in the mouth, they kind of struggle. And that's kind of the I don't know, the MO of this group. I don't think that's what we'll end up saying at all.
Yeah.
But I can see how people could feel that way a little bit, especially when expectations are elevated by how they played for a game and a half coming into that point. So I'm just trying to put into words what I think they're feeling and also be like, hey, I understand that. I also would say, like, they've just played 7 awesome quarters out of the last 8.
Right.
And let's focus on that part as opposed to what was a kind of a bummer of a third quarter.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing I'll say on that is, the UCLA is allowed to have a good defensive drive too. It's not just Oregon. Like, they can play good defense. Like, Oregon's first drive of the third quarter, it was a 6-yard rush, then a 1-yard rush. So you're kind of behind the sticks. It's 3rd and 4. They bring a simulated pressure off the left side. Gabriel tries to escape. UCLA sees that. Guy rushes down, forces an incomplete pass. Like, it's just a good defensive play. And UCLA is allowed to have those, even though they did not show a lot of them in the first half. So, shit happens, and that's okay. But overall, I mean, I think there's a lot to like. It's really, I thought it was really important that Tez Johnson got involved, and he really did. Obviously, 11 receptions, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. Trayshawn Holden got in on the action as well. Nice.
Sorry.
Drop. Jordan James, another 100-yard game. It wasn't always pretty in terms of Jordan James running, but look, still over 5 yards a carry. Like that, you take that every single day. And he's, Dan said post game, he's like, eventually we're going to break one of these runs off, and he's going to go for 20, 30, 40 yards, and maybe score a touchdown or whatever. And same thing that we've been saying the last couple of weeks is, like, it's there. He's close. He's getting tripped up. He's just maybe a little bit unlucky. So, like, overall, like, I was impressed by the offensive line. I thought that UCLA's defensive front was better than Oregon State's front, so I wanted to see how that would go. And I thought it went pretty well. I thought Gabriel had a lot of time in the pocket to throw when necessary, and when he didn't, the nice thing is that he used his legs a lot tonight and got outside and picked up a couple yards and just kept a play going and tried to create as much time for his receivers to get open. I thought there was a lot of good on the offensive side of the ball, and defensively, we already kind of went into it, but they were stifling tonight. They hurt Ethan Garbers in that early fourth quarter, late third quarter. Like, they were really good today.
Real quick before I got to go, because they're closing the press box down. I know a lot of people talked about why they were throwing so many screen plays. Why weren't they running the football a bunch? I asked Lanning, like, what did you guys see in the perimeter offensively that you guys wanted to attack it time and time again? And basically he said that they didn't want to go at the strength of UCLA's defense, which was right up the middle. Jay Toia, defensive lineman, is going to be in the NFL next year, like a 3-year starter. He's got NFL. There were a bunch of NFL scouts here for this game. And a lot of them were here to see what he would do against Oregon's offensive line. And Oregon just chose not even to give him a chance. And it was attack the perimeter, use your skill guys. To Jared's point of, like, Dan said that they need to do better at perimeter blocking, because eventually one of these, screen plays is going to rip open for a 50-yard touchdown pass. But that's why the offensive game plan was what it was, right? Why we saw so many screen plays, why we saw so many, dump offs that were 5-yard passes from Gabriel. I think he threw 28 of his 41 passes were either behind the line of scrimmage or 5 yards past the line of scrimmage or fewer. So it was very clear. And I think that's honestly, like, if that's going to be Oregon's offense, that is Oregon's offense. It was last year with Bo.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it with Tez Johnson, that he continues to be this unbelievable playmaker. They got Evan Stewart. Trayshawn Holden has turned himself into a threat. Eventually, when we'll see Gary Bryant maybe come back this season from an injury. We saw Justice Lowe break it into the system this year in this game. Like, they just like the skill and the one-on-one matchups. And it's back to what Will Stein said, of just, like, get your playmaker the ball as quickly as possible. Don't be super greedy and just let the guy do a job. And that's essentially what they've done tonight.
Yeah, I good point bringing up kind of the strategy there. And I do think, I'm curious on rewatch what it'll look like. I do think some of the perimeter blocking stopped some potential big plays from getting. And I also think UCLA swarmed to the ball. Give them credit. Their defensive backs weren't necessarily in good coverage at all downfield, but the short stuff and intermediate stuff, I thought they did a pretty good job of just being around the ball and being sure tacklers, because there weren't a lot of, on those screen passes specifically, there weren't a lot where a couple tackles were broken, they got upfield. A lot of those were hit right at the point of, right at the point of the catch. Not a lot of opportunity to do much. I would guess that's going to be, as Matt said earlier, probably not going to learn what they want to improve on. I would guess that's going to be on their list of things to work on. Are you taking off, Matt?
I am. It looks like I just saw another security guard, like, look at me like, you have to leave. Apparently at 1:15 in the morning, this place shuts down, which is totally fine by me because it's late.
That's
I got an early
pretty
flight.
reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's okay. All right, Matt. Appreciate you being here. We're gonna finish this up here. Safe travels back up.
We'll
see
you
on Monday.
Thanks, guys.
We'll go for another 12 minutes or so, Jared. I don't have any desire to be doing this after 1:30 if we can avoid it. I did one thing I wanted to touch on, because it was back to your Jordan James point. What a strange rushing season he's had. 6 yards per carry on 64 attempts, not a run over 16 yards.
Yeah, it's really weird.
That's weird.
I think he's I think it's a bit like unlucky. Like in baseball, they have like BABIP, which is like batted balls in play, which is like the expected batting average of what you put. And some people are really lucky, like they just get lucky or whatever reason. And I feel like Jordan James's BABIP is like significantly lower than like what it looks like on paper. It's like every rocketed ground ball is an out, and you're like, this doesn't make sense. Like, what's going on here? And he's just getting unlucky. I didn't really feel like he had too many of those plays today, specifically where he was like a shoestring away from breaking off a 30-yarder or a 40-yarder. But in weeks past, he absolutely has, where he's like 10, 12 yards down the field, and it's just him and the safety like yanks on his ankle and he's down after 15 yards. So it's a weird season, but he's still really productive.
Almost 100 yards per game. It's very good.
And I've seen people like upset about the running game. And I just think it's just not as good as last year for a couple of reasons. I think the offensive line was better last year. And Bucky Irving's a legitimate NFL running back. And while I think Jordan James will be a legitimate NFL running back, there are things that Bucky Irving could do that Jordan James cannot do. And that's okay, because Jordan James is still very talented. but some of the wiggle and the ability to get out of tackles and find holes that Bucky could do, I don't think that Jordan James is nearly as good at. And that's kind of like what turns a 10-yard run to maybe like a 25-yard run that Jordan James just might not have.
And the weird thing is, I think the thing that Jordan actually has over Bucky is like straight line open field speed, and he just hasn't gotten to a point to to show that. And I will say I get as a fan, if you're looking at the run game and the pass game at times this year, it has lacked the explosives. Tonight was not a night where the pass game lacked the explosives. They got a couple over the top of the defense. This was a UCLA defense, by the way, had given up a ton of yardage, but had one pass play over 40 yards all season, even though they've been giving up like 300 yards per game. Mm-hmm. Oregon got 2 over the top today. And so I don't think that part was lacking. But the run game, strangely, as we just talked about with Jordan, it's just like a step or two away from breaking some big ones. And I think based on the law of averages, we'll see him hit one of these or a couple of these in the coming games. But I get where you'd be like, regardless of what the stats are, feeling like, why aren't we breaking off these 50-yard runs? Where is that? Those will come. I just think, to your point, Jared, I think that was a good analogy with the baseball stat there. It's just a couple of real close ones, and I do think he will get there, because what he does that really impresses me is just maximizing. Like, very rarely is he getting tackled behind the line or like for 2 yards. It's like it's like everything is basically 4 yards to 9 yards, which is why he's averaging like 6 yards per play. Let's get to some defensive players maybe real quick, Jared, here before we sign off.
For sure.
Out. I thought this is your group, but I'll throw out just a couple of names. Obviously, Jordan Birch had a great series, a great sequence there with a couple of tackles behind the line of scrimmage. Matt had the tweet earlier. I don't know what the last time it was. An Oregon single player had back-to-back tackles for loss of 5 yards. Like, probably doesn't happen very often.
No, it can't.
It can't. I thought he played really well. I thought once again Jabbar Muhammad was pretty dang special out there in coverage. And I agree with what Dan said post game. It was not a huge Jeffrey Bossa game from like I'll be curious on snap counts in 4 hours when PFF releases them. Mm-hmm. But I thought in the sample size I watched, there's some pretty good stuff overall. Any comment on those guys or any individuals you want to shout out?
Yeah, I thought Birch was really good. Obviously, the 2 tackles for loss and the sack are going to take like the obvious picture, but I thought he was really good setting edges too. I thought UCLA tried to kind of get around and run some outside zones or anything like that, but I thought Birch did a good job there, and he just gave like an extra second for one of his linebackers or his safety to get into position. And I think that makes all the difference in the world in the run game. Bossa, I thought, was on the field a lot, like especially comparatively, but I thought he was there a lot. I was kind of surprised, like he would be like in on the tackle. I'm like, oh, Jeff, nice to see you, guy. Like I'm happy that you're on the field. He had a great pass breakup before the Tysheem Johnson interception. He also had a great open field tackle against a tight end. I can't remember when that was, but it was out in like the right side of the hash. And you're like, all right, that looked like his pass breakup. I'll talk specifically because that was a big play, and I think people will remember that when listening to this. He looked good. He was step for step I think it was a tight end on an out route. He was step for step, and he punched that ball, and it wasn't even close. It was like great coverage and everything, and that's like prime healthy Jeff Bossa. So very clearly the bye week helped with him. But I want to give a shout out again to Devin Jackson, my hero. Great coverage downfield against Maliki Matavau. Even though I thought Garbers threw a great ball and that could have been catchable, like Jackson did everything he could to defend it. And again, I thought his speed was really important. Other guys on the defensive line, Mateo had a sack. Tatum crashed the pocket a couple times. Jamar Caldwell, even though he had that illegal hands to the face, I thought was pretty disruptive on the interior, as was Derek Harmon. Amari Washington had a couple like really nice plays. I think at least one tackle for loss, but he was in the backfield a couple times, and a fullback tonight. So that was
how about that?
How about that?
I like it when we line up 330-pound guys at fullback. Let's just do that every time.
I don't know why people don't do it more often. That is a great way to run somebody out of a road. So big shout out to him. I thought it was interesting. Maybe this is like a little Pac-12 After Dark, Big Ten After Dark thoughts with me. I thought it was interesting that the first person to come off the bench today for Oregon as like a real substitute, like, hey, you're done, go take some time off today, was Tyler Turner. Tyler Turner came on for Kobe Savage.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting. I'm going to be very interested to see what Kobe Savage's PFF grade is tomorrow, because with my two eyes, wasn't great. And I don't know. I like Kobe a lot as a player, but it just wasn't his day, maybe. I just thought that was interesting. Just something I'm gonna like put in the back of my head for future reference if things ever do happen, because staff is very clearly high on Tyler Turner. And they started him against Idaho. Dan won't admit it, but it was very clearly a suspension to Tysheem Johnson for whatever reason. But again, they started him. There were other players on the team that they could have started, but I think he's got some real grit to him. I think he could be a good player down the road. But just something I'm putting away for future use.
I got two defensive stat things and then a couple of sub things that also stood out to me. How about 2 turnovers first? They hadn't had any since the Boise State game, or sorry, the Idaho game. A couple of interceptions there. We talked about going in. This was a game where that would maybe be possible. Garbers was a little prone to putting the ball into bad spots in the field. And I thought Oregon did a good job of, like, Tysheem's interception was a great interception. It really wouldn't have mattered because it was on 4th down. So catch or no catch, it was a turnover. But I thought it was a great extension and a finish on that play. 47 rush yards for UCLA, had -7 at the half. The 47 rush yards are the second fewest by a Dan Lanning coach defense at Oregon. 40 last year against Colorado is the record. So, I mean, we knew going in this was a game where UCLA wasn't going to run it very much. Like, I think they ran for 40 yards or something, 50 yards last week against LSU. So, like, we knew this wasn't going to be a big run game, but they did their job there. And then the two kind of sub things that stood out, when Rashad Strother lost his helmet in the first half.
Yes. Yeah.
Kavika Rogers entered.
Interesting.
Been kind of more of a tackle than a guard, but this is seemingly the first guy that they want to put in there. I would not have expected Charlie Pickard because he's a center and a center only, but I wasn't sure if it would be like Janoris Wilson or some other player who'd been repping more at guard. Thought that was kind of notable.
And they ran right behind Kavika that play, the next play. Yeah. Obviously, Nishad went in right after, but they ran right up the left side of the line, right behind Kavika. So they had full faith that he was going to do whatever his job was on that play.
He seems to be their next man up at guard, and I would guess at right tackle. I think left tackle would be George Silva, but we haven't really needed to see that yet. So, and knocking on wood at 1:24 in the morning, hopefully we don't see that. And then the other one's the obvious one, which is Austin Novosad over Dante Moore to close the game, which I don't put a ton of stock in. I've seen people reacting to that. It was just, I wrote, oh, that's interesting on Twitter because it kind of was, considering Dante had played the previous game. I'm going to guess they're just rotating these guys when they have mop-up opportunities. And to be clear, like, Dante came in against Oregon State and like actually ran the offense for a series. Austin came in and it was handoff victory formation. So unfortunately, we didn't really get to see a lot there. It was kind of an uneven, if you're trying to compare the two quarterbacks, we didn't really get an opportunity to see him run the offense, which I guess is something I'd like to see at some point this year if possible. But I thought that was at least kind of a notable twist. You would have thought maybe, hey, Dante against his old school, do you want to throw him back out there? Didn't get a chance to see that. Thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too, that and the Kavika thing. I had one other subplot kind of category here. I'll be interested to see this tomorrow, but I do not know how often Dante Manning played tonight. I do not feel like he was on the field defensively specifically. He was on the field for special teams. I know that, but I don't feel like he rotated that much. Like he and Nico Reed snap count, like coming into this game, were practically even. I think one of them had one more snap than the opposing guy. And I don't think that's going to be the case tomorrow after I look at whatever the snap counts are for PFF. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And lastly, Jaden Moore. Shout out my boy.
Yeah.
Jaden
How about
Moore.
that? I like this guy.
Yeah. I just think that he's like just going to be a third down rush guy if he continues to progress and get better during his time here. He's quick. He's twitchy. He gets past tackles. I mean, he was in on that screenplay and he hit Garbers, so which might have been the ankle injury, like the actual play. Because I think I remember him seeing Garbers like limp off after that. So I thought that was interesting. I'm a fan of his. Really raw kid coming out of high school, but like was a really good basketball player. And I always kind of liked the basketball defensive end mold. So I don't know. I think he could be something. I'm not sure if he's going to be like real rotational or anything like that, but just, name to monitor. Kind of the same thing with the Tyler Turner stuff.
Yeah, I think he's basically whatever role we thought Blake Purchase might have. It seems like Jaden Moore has that role, and that doesn't have to be a shot at Blake, but it just feels like if you're going to find an edge guy to give, I don't know, 6 to 10 snaps a game to, it seems like he's who they've chosen to. And to your point before, it feels almost like he's exclusively in on like third down or second and long.
Yeah.
Like he's out there to rush the passer and wreak havoc in the backfield. Doesn't really play on rundowns, but I like what I've seen. I always enjoy when there's kind of like a guy that maybe wasn't super prevalent in our discussions in the offseason. Like, I don't know how many times Jaden Moore's name came up when we talked this offseason. Probably not a lot. I like it when a guy like that ends up being involved. You know what I mean? Like even Justice Lowe on offense, while I guess it's kind of similar, probably similar snap count wise. Like that was not the receiver you thought would break into whatever role he has in this offense. You thought maybe it'd be Jurion or a true freshman. So that's another name to bring up. And I guess Justice is as well, catching, I know, 2 passes for like maybe negative yards. I haven't actually.
I think he was in the positives here.
2 for 7.
2 for 7, come on.
Yeah. Okay,
come on. With a long of 6, so 1 for 1.
And 15 yards after catch with which is all those passes were behind the line of scrimmage, which is why. So, I mean, I think just to wrap it here, Jared, unless you had like any other little data points you wanted to get to.
I'm trying to think if I have anything more. I don't think I do, though.
Okay. It is 1:30, so I'm cool wrapping it. I guess just broadly to just kind of put this thing on ice. 21-point win. Three score games are blowouts. I don't care what you say. Like that this was a blowout. This was a very dominant win for Oregon. Could it have been cleaner? Absolutely. And if it were cleaner, it would have looked more like maybe what some of the fans expected. But I also think this was definitely a step in the right direction and a step forward. And I think if you are arguing in the contrary of that, I think you're being like an unnecessarily difficult grader and expecting perfection. And this wasn't perfection, but it's really hard to expect them to come out and play perfect football. And I also give a little credit to UCLA for being scrappy in the middle of the game there and not just rolling over. Like that was something I know Matt had brought up, is like, could UCLA get to a point where they just kind of stopped trying? And I don't think they didn't get there in the third quarter. And I don't think they ever totally got there. Maybe they did when Garbers was knocked out of the game. I guess you'd say they probably did.
That's probably when, yeah.
But I just think all in all, like there's like a solid B+ performance, some really, really nice highs, some lows that are disappointing, and a really weird play in the middle of the game that just kind of like seemed to throw the entire, I don't know, flow of the game off for Oregon a little bit for whatever reason. And if you want to be critical of one thing, it would be just like kind of a bummer of a third quarter. But Oregon's now played 7 of its last 8 quarters, I think, at a really high level. And that's what you'd like to see. And hopefully you see them play similarly against Michigan State leading into the big one on the 12th.
Yeah, 100%. I'm in complete agreement there. I think that this was a good game. I think we've all, since the Boise State and Idaho games, we've all been wanting to see Oregon execute at a high level. I think they've done that, like you said, 7 of the last 8 quarters. What was it? It was like 12 straight drives they'd scored, other than Neal's.
It might have been 14. It was like 12 or 14. I think it was 14, but it was, something like that.
Still very impressive. And that's so hard to do at this level. Even the great teams, like you look at the Alabama-Georgia game, like Georgia hadn't been down by 28 points since like 2022. It's been 2 full years since they've been down by that much. And they were just down by that today. And they almost came back and won the game. Like college football is really hard. It's really hard to win at a successful level all the time. And I think Dan has kind of spoiled us in the last year and a half or so of his tenure of having these really great teams and getting out and winning by 30, 40 points. It's not going to happen as often this year. I think I said this preseason, like there are going to be better defenses this year that Oregon goes against. UCLA is not one of those, so I get why people weren't too thrilled about it. But
Yep.
Look, man, they're 4-0, 2 really good executing wins. I'm not going to say the level of competition was great. It's not like they're going on the road and beating some top 25 team nationally, but this is what you want to see. These are the steps that they need to take in order to get to that level where everybody sees how talented they are and how much they could do over the course of the season and maybe into the postseason. So encouraging steps, and it was a good game.
Yeah, it was a good game. All right, we're going to wrap it there. It's 1:32 in the morning. Sorry to keep bringing up the time, but I'm reminding myself I will be sleeping very shortly, which is good news for me. And good news for those listening who will probably wake up and watch this / listen to this podcast. So good on you. Get more sleep than we will both get tonight. And that's totally okay. But for Erik Skopil, Matt Prehm, who has left the show for the time being, and Jared Mack, thank you for listening to tonight's post-game reaction to the Oregon UCLA football game. We'll be back on Monday with our normal podcast schedule leading into Friday's game against Michigan State for the regular season Big Ten Conference opener. So until then, talk to you later, folks.
Peace.